Is your air fryer toxic? That is going to be the question we're going to be diving into today. I personally love my air fryer, so I'm a little bit scared about the results. I'm going to be reacting to the pros and cons because Sakina Okoko, science writer and researcher at the Doctor's Kitchen, is here with me today on the podcast to discuss this very popular gadget. I'm a little bit nervous about this because, as you know, I love my air fryer. I think it gives a lovely crust on certain types of food. I have Tuesdays, we have salmon and gochujang marinade, one of my favorite meals. But I'm always getting questions about whether air fryers are harmful, not just to human health, but potentially to environmental health. So that's going to be the topic of conversation we're diving in today. Air fryers, what even are they? Because this is news to you, right? You haven't come across them before.
I was saying earlier, you see them on your countertops and you don't really know how it works. Your food comes out cooked and crispy in a few minutes or how long is it?
It's magic, honestly.
Yeah, it's like so quick.
I love it. It's a magic trick.
So I was like, how does it work? So I looked into it and I found a quite cool diagrams. I think we'll put it on the screen.
Yeah, we'll put it on now.
But it works by circulating hot air containing tiny droplets of oil around the food. And so the food is placed in a basket and it has vents and chambers that allow the air to circulate evenly. So it cooks the food evenly and it makes it, because it's such a small space, it makes it cook really quickly compared to an oven, for example.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a mix between an oven using a fan and like deep frying.
Yeah.
Basically.
So it's kind of like a misnomer, right? Because I guess it's not a fryer in the sense that you're dumping the whole product in hot oil. It's more like a turbocharged oven, just something that has a confined space, circulating air, so you get that consistent temperature across the product that you're trying to cook. Yeah, which is why it gives such great results.
And crispy, because it only uses tiny droplets of oil compared to deep frying, for example, that uses a lot.
Totally, yeah. So on the face of it, most people might think, okay, I'm using less oil, it's quicker, and it's basically an oven. Ergo, it's definitely going to be healthier. We're going to dive into some of those claims as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be compared to a mini convection oven because convection ovens also use hot air and a source of heat. And it's quite different from a conventional oven because a conventional oven would only use a source of heat, like the little heat pipes on the top and the bottom of the oven.
Gotcha.
So yes, it could be compared to a mini convection oven, but it does uses that hot oil that's dispersed, and this is where it kind of can be a sign of concern maybe, but we'll look into that.
Yeah. And we should probably put a little diagram of a convection oven and a conventional oven just to sort of clarify exactly what oven somebody might even have in their household, because I don't think many people would know, like, okay, is my oven convection or conventional? Like, how do you tell the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when there's hot air being blown, so a fan normally would be a convection oven. So I think probably most modern ovens should be convection, but we should definitely make sure to clarify that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of modern ovens right now have the ability to do both as well.
For sure. So the main difference between air fryer and oven is that the air fryer circulates hot air very rapidly in a small space. So that's why it cooks so quickly. Yeah. And that's why it's way quicker than a convection oven when you're trying to cook food. Yeah,
which is great for time poor individuals who are trying to knock out a meal really, really quickly. And actually, you know, whilst now we have a full kitchen in our studio, before, when the kitchen was being built, I was relying on literally 2 air fryers, a chopping board and a chef's knife to knock out like meals. And that's actually how I came up with the whole diversity bowl thing, which is, you know, just collections of different foods. And then you just air fry some potatoes or air fry some tempeh pieces and a bit of marinade. And it was like, it was a bit of a revelation for me because I've always been very snobby about the air fryer.
Have you?
Yeah, as a lot of sort of home cooks and chefs are as well. I never really jumped onto the air fryer train until at the start of this year. And now I'm fully on, and now I feel like I'm about to be derailed. So let's dive into some of the pros, I guess, for whether air frying is healthier than the other modes of cooking.
Yeah, so I looked at a few studies. There's not a lot of evidence, and a lot of the studies compare air frying to deep frying because it is considered an alternative to deep frying. So I didn't find a lot of studies that compared it to other cooking methods like oven baking or sauteing. So there was a bit of a gap in the research, I think, about that, which is probably because it's, I guess, the popularity of air fryers is quite recent.
Yeah.
And maybe there's not a lot of interest in funding those studies.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely popular. I mean, there's so many cookbooks that I'm seeing out there, like, healthy air fryer books. And then there's the companies that do the air fryers that are putting out their own books, but then also sort of influencers and chefs putting out air fryer dedicated books. And we should actually caveat that our newsletter has been sponsored by an air fryer in the past. So there is that sort of like conflict of interest. Obviously, I really want air fryers to be good because I enjoy them so much. But we're going to be as sort of measured as we can.
Yeah, it definitely meets a need. I think like the fact that it's so popular right now, it means that we want quicker cooking and efficient, easy, just throw everything in a basket and then you get your meal.
Yeah.
So I think we can still be aware that there is a need for people and for everyone and you to have these quick meals, especially for lunch and stuff like that at work.
Yeah.
But what can we use, and is air frying the best way to get there? We'll see. So I think, so in terms, I started with the pros. So I started with what would make air frying a healthy option.
Yeah.
And basically the main argument is that when you compare it to deep frying, air frying is much better for health.
Okay.
And it produces similar results.
Okay.
So most of the research compared with deep frying, and overall air frying produces way fewer harmful compounds compared to air frying. That's because cooking oil at high temperature produces very harmful compounds.
Gotcha.
Like advanced
glycemic end products.
End products, yeah.
I always call them AGs because it's easier to sort of pronounce, but advanced glycemic end products are a really important molecule or compound because in excess they can cause what is described as rusting inside the human body because these AGs, they sort of bump into things, cause inflammation. It's one of the reasons why you want to keep your glucose spikes as small and as gradual as possible because this can lead to issues that lead to a metabolic problem down the line, like type 2 diabetes. So advanced glycemic products, advanced glycemic end products, if they can be minimized, is a good thing.
Yeah, and as you said, it's frequent consumption. I think that's a good point to make, that it's not because you eat deep fried food one time that is going to cause a major health problems.
Yeah.
But frequently eating those deep fried food often every day can cause a lot of problems for health and higher risk of chronic diseases. So there was one study that we can call the fish cake study because we'll refer to it a few times, and it's one of the main studies that was comparing different cooking methods.
Oh, nice.
So they compared air fried fish cake with different types of cooking methods like deep fried, oven baked, and they found that the air fried fish cake had lower harmful compounds, so those AGEs, compared to deep fried fish cake.
Okay.
And there was another study that found that air frying decreased the acrylamide content by about 90%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, compared to deep
huge.
frying. Yeah, so it's a massive difference. So I think that's the main argument for going for air frying compared to deep frying is this decrease in harmful compounds that we see.
That's really interesting because a couple of years ago there were headlines about toast and burnt toast having an excess amount of acrylamides in. And acrylamides, just for a bit of background, is a type of carcinogen. It's one of the reasons why in excess sort of barbecued and burnt food can be toxic and lead to cancer and is associated with cancer. So if there's a cooking process that can reduce the number of acrylamides, that's actually a good thing. Going back to that study actually on fish cakes, which is getting me hungry. Yeah. Because I'm just thinking about a fish cake.
Sounds good.
Yeah, deep frying it and stuff and sauteing. Did they have any suggestion of air fryers being better than oven-based cakes?
So we'll go a bit more into that after
in
terms of it's fine in terms of like the cons of so they basically classified the different cooking methods in terms of the production of those harmful compounds in an order. Oven baking was better than air frying. So air frying, it was like deep frying, air frying, and pan frying in a similar level to air frying, depending on the time of cooking, how long the food was cooked for. And then oven baking was the least harmful in terms of those products,
Harmful
those
compounds.
end products.
Gotcha.
But compared to deep frying, air frying was better.
Okay.
And that seems to be the case for a few studies. So it seems like we can kind of confidently say that.
That's a good takeaway, I think, because, you know, there are a lot of families, you know, from different backgrounds that might be deep frying pakoras. I'm just thinking about pakora, which is this veggie-based dish that's covered in batter, and then you dunk it into a ton of oil, and it creates this beautiful, gorgeous sort of crust that is like deeply spiced. And you know, a pakora is like one of life's best things with like a cup of chai, and it's, you know, I've got all the memories sort of baked in my head now. If there is a way to achieve a similar end product by air frying, you probably need a big air fryer, because we tend to do pakoras in big batches. But if there is a way to sort of minimize some of those acrylamides and toxic chemicals, maybe there's an air fryer. I'm still reacting, but
test. Do you think it would produce the same textures and stuff?
That's a really good question. I think you wouldn't get that sort of gluttonous feel of like a little bit of oil that comes, and that sort of greasiness that a lot of people would like. I would prefer it to be a little bit less oily, but that's because I'm sort of a bit adverse to those kind of textures after eating so healthily over, you know, 10, 15 years now. So you probably wouldn't have exactly the same texture, but certainly something that is comparable. And if it had markedly lower harmful compounds, I'd feel a lot better about it.
Could be worth it.
Could be worth it.
And so another potential advantage compared to deep frying was that one study compared air fried and deep fried onions. So I guess like it's a similar. And they found that air fried onions had a higher concentration of polyphenols.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Air fryers are back in my good books.
Compared to deep frying. Compared to deep frying.
Yeah.
So it's same. It's like, it's always about what you compare it to. So compared to deep frying, they had higher amounts of polyphenols, bioaccessible polyphenols in that study.
Okay,
what
well,
do you
that's
think
good.
of that?
That's good. That's good to know. That is good to know. Because like, again, you know, deep fried onions that you put over, I don't know, it could be a hot dog, or it could be biryani, you know, those like crispy onions that you have. We had a lot of those actually when we were traveling in Malaysia for the Healthy Travels with Dr. Rupy in Penang series. And just that little crisp of like onion is really nice at the end. I haven't tried onions in the air fryer, so I don't know whether it's going to have that same sort of crunch and flavor.
If it would work.
But I would love to figure that out. And the fact that we're preserving polyphenols, big tick in my book.
Yeah.
Green tick. Okay, 2 green ticks. This is great.
2 green ticks. And there was another study comparing. So that's quite an interesting one. It's a small study in a journal that is not one of the most reputable journals, I think. But it's still interesting. And they compared air frying, different cooking methods for brassica vegetables like kale, broccoli, sprouts, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. And using the same Instant Pot, they compared different cooking methods like sauteing, steaming, and air frying. And they found that air frying at 160 degrees for 10 minutes showed the highest total phenolic content and antioxidant activity compared to sauteing. That showed the lowest.
That's really interesting. Sauteing had the lowest?
Yeah, which I also found quite surprising, because normally when you saute food, it will be for a lower amount of time and at a lower temperature. So I would expect the opposite. Obviously, the study is a bit limited because they use one Instant Pot, so it's not necessarily reflective of a real life situation in terms of cooking. I think it could have been interesting if they compared with sauteing in a pan. Maybe it would have had different results. And it focused on phenolic content, so it's one marker.
It's one marker,
you know, it's one marker.
Healthfulness of
so
a food.
It's still, we need more research. But it is an interesting, I found that quite surprising.
That is interesting. And I guess the other sort of caveat to that is most of the time when I'm air frying, I'm doing it at quite a high temperature. So around 200 to 205 degrees centigrade, which is really high. But if we're trying to mimic a saute, then I would consider doing it at a lower temperature. But I tend not to use an air fryer for that purpose. It's not to simply cook the food, is to get a crisp on it. Like a cube of sweet potato or a tempeh sort of crumbled, and you want to try and get that sort of texture of like almost burnt meat. Or like, you know, really, really nicely sort of colored meat. So 160 degrees centigrade, I'd have to try that out to see what it the taste and texture
The
is like? Because
result
in my
would
mind, I'm like,
be-
well, I'll just put it in a stainless steel pan with a little bit of
Yeah.
olive oil and some water, put the lid on, and then saute my veggies. It's quicker, easier, less cleaning hassle, that kind of thing.
So it seems like the common theme is that it depends what you're comparing it
Yes.
to and what you want to, what a result you're trying to get to. So if you're trying to deep fry foods, it could be worth trying the air fryer in that context. Like for onions, like you were saying, with different foods like chips and stuff that you would normally eat deep fried, it could be worth trying the air fryer, because compared to the deep fryer, it will be better in terms of health.
Yeah.
What about cost? So what do you think? Do you think it's cheaper?
My hunch is that it is cheaper because, and I have a little bit of an insight into this as well, because about a year ago when we were doing some BBC food related stuff on the cost of living crisis, which is still obviously an issue, they compared conventional ovens to air fryers, and they went through a whole bunch of different use cases. And from my understanding, air fryers definitely do reduce the amount of energy required to cook food. And particularly if you're in a household of 1 or 2 people, it's a lot more convenient, and overall you do save money. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's what I saw as well. I think you're completely correct. That's what I saw. So there was a energy saving trust, and then there's also Eco Experts, which is a blog written by experts in terms of environmental. And they say that it's generally cheaper to run an air fryer than an oven. They say that an air fryer costs around 51p per hour to run, while an electric oven costs around 85p per hour.
Okay.
But as you said, it depends how many portions you're cooking. So if you're cooking for multiple people, more than 2, or if you're batch cooking, then the electric oven would be more energy efficient.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because most air fryers are pretty small. There are some on the market that are big, and you can put like a whole chicken in it and vegetables and all the rest of it. But I guess the amount, or as in the types of air fryers that we use in that particular comparison, were going to be the smaller ones.
Yeah, I don't have the detail, but I'm guessing it would be that.
Definitely not the size of a conventional oven, because an oven is like massive compared to it. And even if you've got a really, really big air fryer, the cost of running that would definitely go up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for 1, 2 people with a small air fryer, it seems to be more energy efficient than an electric oven, unless you're cooking for a whole bunch of people that are coming around for Sunday lunch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what that blog was saying.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We'll link to all these in the show notes as well.
Absolutely. There's one more study that was quite interesting in terms of the health impact of air frying compared to deep frying.
Okay.
And it was a randomized control trial.
Okay.
They found that compared to deep fat frying, air frying led to a 74% reduction in the total fat content of the meal, which makes sense. And that resulted in a 67% reduction in the post-meal triglyceride response.
Brilliant.
So it
green tick again.
Yeah. So that's same is compared to deep fat frying, but it does make sense in terms of the oil content.
Okay.
And the use of oil.
That is really good to hear, because so just a little bit of background, after you consume a meal that has fat in it, you're going to be dumping a lot of that fat into your bloodstream by way of the liver partitioning it or packaging it into lipid molecules that ferry your fats around the body. One of the markers that we look at is triglyceride level, and it kind of makes sense, because if you're using less oil in the air frying process, you're going to have less of the excess fats that you'll find that can raise your triglyceride levels anyway. So that kind of makes sense for me. So basically, less oil used in air fry means less triglyceride response in the blood after a meal, postprandial, it's a fancy word for after a meal, compared to deep fat frying. I would sort of expect that.
Yeah, I think so. And it comes back to that mechanism of how air fryers work, which is hot air with tiny droplets of oil compared to large amounts of oil with deep frying.
Okay.
But it's quite interesting to see it in human subjects. And I haven't found a lot of studies like that. So that was quite an interesting finding as well.
Great.
So overall, compared
I'm
to
feeling
deep
pretty
fat
good
frying,
about my air fryers at the moment. You're about to bring me back down to earth now, aren't you? Yeah.
Compared to deep fat frying, it seems like there are quite a few advantages. And I think it could be interesting for fast food chains, for example, or restaurants. I don't know how it would work, as you said, in terms of the size.
Yeah.
But if we were to invent large air fryers, it could maybe be a healthier alternative for those fast food chain who rely on deep frying a lot.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And sorry, Nutmeg, if you're watching this on YouTube, Nutmeg, who's been sleeping on my lap, has just suddenly decided to wake up.
She has a good life.
She's got a very good life. I think her her ears popped up when you mentioned fast food because she's thinking of lunch. That is a really interesting point. I mean, most of the ovens that I think of in a catering environment are like these big sort of rationale ovens that have like got incredible heat and incredible efficiency, and they're almost like air fryers in themselves. I remember actually once I went to cook at a corporate event, and I got to use one of their catering ovens, and I had to half the time that I would actually put in my conventional oven at home, because these ovens were just so powerful. Yeah. And the sort of the thing I was cooking, I remember it vividly actually, because I remember just being blown away by this oven. I was cooking these cauliflower bites, and they're actually the same cauliflower bites that we've got on the Doctor's Kitchen app. They're really good.
So
they're delicious.
Yeah.
They're sort of like in this ranch dressing, like this chili sort of sauce. And I put them in the oven, and then one of the chefs was like, we need to take them out at like 11 minutes. And I was like, 11 minutes, that's not long enough. I took them out, and they were like beautifully crisp on the outside, got a lovely flavor. You had that caramelization effect. And that was sort of like probably my first experience of what an air fryer would be. It was a few years ago now. So yeah, there's probably a difference in the quality of machines that caterers are used to compared to what your average chef at home or home cook is used to. So whether or not there's a use case for air fryers in the catering industry, who knows? But it is an interesting point about the reduction of oil required.
Deep fat frying, or even using those ovens more than using deep fat frying, for example, and try to get that crispy element without using deep fat frying too much. Could be that. Should we go into the cons?
Yeah, let's go into it. Let's do it. Bring me back down to earth.
Okay. So I think in terms of cost, for example, so we said it's more energy efficient, especially if you're cooking small portions, but there is still the initial cost. So if you already have an oven, for example, buying an air fryer when you already have cooking equipment at home can make it a bit less accessible, especially that the price can range and can change quite a lot. There's some that are quite cheap, like £50, but it can go up to £250 and maybe even more. So the initial cost could be a con, especially if you already have cooking equipment at home.
Yeah, definitely. I always say that, like, there are certain gadgets that I think are necessary for a home cook to be able to produce healthful, delicious food. Chef's knife, cooking, a chopping board, pestle and mortar, a good selection of spices, an oven, and a decent hob and a stainless steel pan. Would I add air fryers to that mix? I think it really depends on your likelihood of using air fryers regularly, how often you would do deep fat frying, for example, and how much you want to invest in your own kitchen. But I mean, after today's, and I haven't heard all the cons yet, but like I could be going back on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. There's other equipment that you would invest in first if you want to cook home meals. And I don't think air fryer in terms of the price could be one. Depends on your need. But I think it's a good point in starting with other equipment.
I've got family members that like spend money on like everything from
all the gadgets.
Yeah, all the gadgets, all the different types of grinders and like slow cookers, and a lot of it ends up in the garage. But
some people just love testing everything. I'm the complete opposite. I have like one knife, like one of everything. And I just like don't wanna.
Even in the studio kitchen, like we've got obviously a ton of crockery here, and we do have all the necessary gadgets, but like I've tried to be as minimal as possible because I just don't like waste, and I just like to use the things that I know I'm going to get the most value from. So yeah, but I mean, I'm saying that as an air fryer convert, but
so that was cost. In terms of health, so the fish cake study, we'll go back to that one as we mentioned a bit more. So they found that air frying could produce more harmful compounds than baking or pan frying. So baking resulted in fewer advanced glycation end products. compared to air frying. And it could be due to the fact that AGE content is negatively correlated with moisture content. And oven baking tends to retain moisture a bit more. So that's one possible explanation.
Okay.
In terms of pan frying, they resulted in the same...
Just to add more context to that, actually, one of the good things, quote unquote, about an air fryer is that it's incredibly drying. So it does take out a lot of that moisture effectively because of the efficiency of which you are distributing that hot air around the product itself. Whereas baking, you'd want to keep some of the moisture for a lot of reasons. I can't imagine most people want like a particularly dry cake.
Yeah.
when you you're using the oven.
So air frying for the texture element removes the moisture and makes it more dry. But then the oven, and that could maybe be related to the formation of those products. Yeah, that's interesting.
Super interesting.
And in terms of pan frying, at first they created similar amounts. But as the cooking time increased, air frying produced more harmful compounds compared to pan frying.
Okay.
So it kind of aligns with the idea that the longer the food is cooked, the more there is an opportunity for AGEs to accumulate.
Okay. That's okay. A negative point for the air fry compared to sauteing and baking.
So that's in terms of the harmful compounds, which we mentioned earlier. In terms of the kind of nutritional content, there was one study looking at sardines.
Sardines
filet. And looking at...
what do you call those in French?
Sardine.
Sardine.
I mean, it's the same, but different pronunciation.
Sardine.
Same word.
They're like my
Easy.
favorite fish.
Yeah, they're really good.
Yeah, they're great.
How do you make them then?
Oh, so I've actually air fried them recently just to see what they would taste like. They are okay in the air fryer. They are incredibly dry because you are drying it out. My personal preference is butterfly or you can actually just take the backbone out and then just a little bit of olive oil in a cast iron or a stainless steel pan, but just sort of saute it on both sides and then add your like grated garlic, loads of herbs, a little bit of extra olive oil at the end, and that's all you need.
And it's quite quick, no?
Really quick, and just allowing as long as you get really good fresh sardines, allowing the flavors of the sardines to come through without overpowering it. I mean, I've learned a lot about Italian cooking, I think, through obviously my wife and like traveling around Italy and stuff. And like, for me, it's just about getting the best quality ingredients and allowing those to sing the song rather than trying to like get loads of backup dancers and pyrotechnics and all the rest of it.
That's simple cooking techniques. I mean, it's a good one. Simple cooking techniques and simple ingredients. To allow them to shine. I like that.
I tell you what is really good in the air fryer though, from a fish point of view, is mackerel. I know I'm derailing this completely to like a food here,
maybe.
But mackerel is amazing. But again, butterflied, and then I put a green pesto on one side and a chili red pesto on the other side, and then that in the air fryer for like 9 minutes, I think it is, at a high heat, gives a beautiful texture, a lovely sort of crust to it without overly drying the fish, because it's obviously a bigger fish than sardines.
Okay. So maybe it is that, maybe that's the point we'll come to, is that it depends the food, and you can choose which one you prefer in the air fryer and which one you prefer in the pan or the oven. Maybe that we can have a rank of foods or something. Well, in terms of the nutrition content, there was one study looking at the sardine fillets, and they found that air frying decreased the content of polyunsaturated fatty acids.
The beneficial fatty acids.
And it increased the levels of cholesterol oxidation products, which are linked to the detrimental health effects. So there was a bit of a negative effect of air frying those sardines fillet in terms of the beneficial compounds decreasing and potentially harmful compounds increasing.
Was that compared to sauteing as well in that study, or was it just looking at it?
I don't have access to the full study, which is kind of one of the things I wanted to mention as well. So I'm not sure if it's compared to raw or compared to pan, which would make a big difference. So I think that's one thing to mention.
Because by virtue of cooking anything like sauteing or oven baking, you're going to create some oxidation of fats, which could be deemed as unhealthy because anything that is going to cause that little bit of inflammation. But there's two ways of looking at it. You got to look at it compared to what, as in like which cooking method are you comparing it to? And then another way of looking at it is, okay, what if we used an entirely different cooking method that didn't require any oil whatsoever? Are you just like, I mean, I can't even think about just poaching it because it wouldn't taste anywhere near as good if you didn't have any sort of like element of fat added to it. But just poaching it or steaming it, for example, would that reduce the amount of oxidation of the fats that are in the fish itself? And does it preserve a lot of the other healthful compounds? There's probably a few unknowns there.
Yeah, I think that really highlights the problem with these studies is that often there's not enough different cooking methods that are compared. So it doesn't give a really clear idea of in real life what cooking method is the best to get a nice result. So it's always, that's why we always kind of take them with a pinch of salt.
Literally.
Literally with a
pinch of salt.
Because it's just not, it doesn't really give a clear answer. As to the best cooking methods for health. But what I think was quite interesting about this study, or I thought was quite cool, is that they also looked at the results of adding a mixture of fresh herbs to the air-fried sardines. And they found that when they added a mixture of fresh herbs, I think it was parsley and chives, it reduced the levels of cholesterol oxidation products. And so the authors of the study suggested that fresh herbs could act as natural antioxidants and be protective against the formation of these products, which are formed during cooking.
This is mirroring another study that was looking at, again, the same oxidation products as a result of barbecuing or grilling meats that most people, in the UK summertime and anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere will be having around June to August time. Mitigating that with a selection of herbs and spices has been shown to reduce some of those inflammatory effects. It's a study that actually me and Professor Robert Thomas talked about on a podcast.
I think I remember. And you talked a bit as well about dietary sunscreens and stuff like that. It was so interesting. I think these results are even more interesting than comparing all cooking methods, because in reality we will be cooking foods in different ways. You will be eating deep fried foods and all of that, but what can you add or combine those foods with to kind of mitigate those effects on health, and also have protective elements in your plates. Instead of just classifying all the ways we can cook foods and banning certain ways of cooking foods.
Totally agree. So like, if you're going to have an air fried fish cake or whatever you want to put in the air fryer, having some fresh herbs finely diced, put into like a little dressing and then put over your sardines or whatever you might be eating could be a way to mitigate some of those harmful effects of any sort of cooking method, I would say. And actually, there's so many benefits of having that food matrix of all these different anti-inflammatory compounds. And the other thing I want to just sort of hasten to add here is we don't eat ingredients in isolation, and we're not necessarily having sardines or any other sort of animal-based proteins purely for an anti-inflammatory effect or some of those anti-inflammatory fatty acids. We're getting it for protein, we're getting it for some of the other constituents, and we mitigate some of that trade-off with herbs, spices, vegetables, and what is largely, going to be vegetables on your plate as well.
Yeah, which is what we talk about a lot. I think it's like diversifying and combining different foods with other to provide more benefits. There was another one looking at marinating food or meat. So that study was not on airfryers. Is in Nature review. But it's quite interesting because they talk about marinating food or meat with acidic ingredients like lemon juice and vinegar to decrease the amounts of dietary AGEs that are formed. You've heard of that?
Yeah. I love it.
So it decreases the amount of harmful compounds formed during the cooking process. So that could also be a thing. If you are air frying your foods, make sure to add fresh herbs and maybe a marinade with acidic elements like lemon or vinegar.
Definitely, yeah. And again, there's so many sort of elements of ancient wisdom that are introduced through recipes, I feel like, having an acidic element, having a fresh element, having a cooked element, and how everything is sort of balanced on your plate. And I see this in like, when we start learning about things that have been shown in some of these small studies, you kind of piece it together with some ancient wisdom, and you're like, that's why we have pickles, or that's why we have these certain ferments, and that's why we start a meal with vegetables, and all these different animals. I feel like every time we chat about like a theme or any sort of like topic that we're going to do a podcast on, we always come back down to the same thing. It's about diversification, about making sure it's mainly plants and enjoying your food and dose. And
absolutely, it's so interesting to see that. It feels like we're kind of untangling things that people have been doing for centuries, and we're now just adding scientific evidence and with studies that are a bit limited, but we're trying to prove why or understand the mechanisms behind things that people have been doing. And that are quite simple, and it is true, like every time we come back to the same things, it's simple tips and it's all kind of linked together, which makes it nice, but also applying in real life is the difficult element.
Totally, it's about the implementation. Which
that's what you always say, and it's true. It's true. The solutions are simple. The implementation, that's the hard stuff, putting this stuff into action every single day, which is why, we started the app, and, we want to try and integrate healthy eating seamlessly into people's lives by doing the meal planners and the health goal algorithm and all the other things we've got in store for 2024 for the app. So in terms of cons, we have maybe the initial cost, the production of harmful compounds with the cooking process, maybe a reduced amount of some beneficial compound, especially fatty acids, beneficial fatty acids. And then the last point is that I think one of the main arguments for air fryers is that it uses less oil. And I wanted to know what you think about that, because I think there's a lot of things that it's less oil, so it's less calories, so it's healthier, which is kind of the common thinking process behind air fryers. What do you think of that?
I think this sort of idea of using less oil, which equates to less calories and therefore is healthier, sort of speaks to the dietary dogma that we've been inundated with over the last 3-4 decades, probably more, about calories in, calories out. And whilst I concede that it is useful for a general ballpark figure of how much energy you are consuming on a day-to-day basis, I think everything else is chucked out the window for that sole formula, without really thinking about the quality of your ingredients. And so I don't buy the idea that purely because it's less calories as a function of it having less oil, that it is necessarily healthier. If you were asking, let's say, not all personal trainers, I don't want to like just say every personal trainer is just, wedded to this idea, but certainly if you ask with big food, they would say, well, it's less oil, it's less calories, it's ergo going to be healthier for people. And that's like a hard line that they can stick behind because it's a comfortable truth. The uncomfortable truth is nutrition is a lot more complicated than calories in, calories out. So I don't buy that. Would I say it's better to have a tablespoon or two of oil versus a cup? Yeah, I probably would. I would say definitely it's better to have less oil in that context. But a tablespoon or two compared to a few sprays, I don't think is going to make a massive, massive difference in the grander context of things when we are comparing different cooking methods and different ingredients and all the other elements that go toward a healthful diet. So it's interesting, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be this groundbreaking breakthrough for a lot of people that's going to allow them to lead healthier lives.
I think, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it also comes back to a quality of the source of oil. Like we were talking for fruits, for example, like it's not about sugar is bad, so we should never eat it. It's about where is it coming from. And with oils, for example, some oils also have potentially beneficial effects on health.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of extra virgin olive oil. I love the fact that it does have those anti-inflammatory compounds. We've talked about all the different elements of those on another podcast, all about olive oil. So, having zero of that is actually probably going to be at the detriment of someone's diet rather than at the benefit of it, even though it does contain more calories. So again, that's a great example of how it's a lot more complicated than just calories in, calories out.
What about the temperature? Do you think, I haven't looked into this, but do do you think air frying, because it usually uses more high temperatures compared to pan frying, for example, do you think that the use of oil, if you're pan frying a sardine fillet, for example, would be more beneficial than air frying using oil?
Yeah, so it depends on the oil in question. So if we're looking at olive oil, the smoke point of an olive oil tends to be around 180 to 190 degrees centigrade. So when you're sauteing, as long as it's like a low to medium heat, you're not going to be hitting those upper elements. And a good sort of like guide to see whether you are exceeding the temperature of an olive oil is just to look at whether it's smoking and whether you can smell the acrid smell that is representative of those bonds breaking down and you actually destroying some of those polyphenols that are why olive oil is so healthful. When you're using an air fryer, you're taking it to quite a high temperature. If you're using it like I do to get that nice like sort of crust on the outside. But if like one of the other studies you were talking about earlier, where you take it to 160 degrees centigrade and you're comparing it to a saute, that's going to be within the boundaries of what is acceptable as a smoke point for olive oil. Other oils have higher smoke points, like coconut oil famously, which is why like every sort of health influencer went for a coconut oil like 5-6 years ago, because there's a high smoke point. The smoke point is around 200 degrees centigrade, so not markedly different. And whether or not that would mitigate against some of the acrylamides and the other harmful compounds as a result of high heat cooking, I doubt it, if I'm honest, and I don't think it would be a massive difference. So if we were to deep fry chips in a vat of coconut oil versus canola oil, is that going to have a marked difference on health? I don't think so. You might find a study that shows that it has less ages and less acrylamides in the coconut oil, but is that going to make a marked difference over, the healthfulness of that particular meal or what it's served with? I don't think so. That's a hunch though.
Yeah, I don't know if there are studies like that, but it seems like generally that order that was highlighted in the fish cake study, which would be deep frying is more harmful than air frying, is more harmful than pan frying, is more harmful than oven baking. Or we can maybe put it the other way around to be a bit more positive. But it seems like that's kind of the order we're getting to. So pan frying, because of also that oil element of not reaching at such a high temperature, could be better, a better choice in terms of cooking.
And I think it's nice actually as a visual for me to think about like, okay, how often am I going to be now, on the basis of what we've just been chatting about, using my air fryer? Am I going to use it every day? Am I going to use it once a week? And where do I position it in terms of how often do I have deep fried food? Probably not more than once a month for me. Some other people might be once or twice a week. And there lies an interesting decision for a lot of people as to whether they want to invest the 50 to 250 pounds in getting an air fryer if they know that they're going to be reducing their number of harmful chemicals that they're exposed to. Everyone has that decision to make. Ideally it seems like would be steaming and low temperature cooking and sauteing all of our food,
which is not always realistic.
Exactly, but from a convenience point of view, it's just not there.
So we can go into more practical tips, I think, of what we should do with that, with those results. Before that, one last con that you mentioned earlier when we were talking about this topic is the environmental impact. So we said that it's better in terms of energy efficiency, but what about you call them forever chemicals?
Forever chemicals, This is an uncomfortable truth again, actually, about the ubiquity of these chemicals in non-stick pans. These they're called PFOS and PFAS, and there's a whole bunch of other products, as well as new products that haven't been deemed as unhealthy or unfit for the environment yet, but they're due a labeling system. So I don't know if you know about the issues around BPA. BPA is now banned. I think France banned it before the UK.
Oh, it could be.
France.
I mean, definitely Europe before the US.
Definitely, but the replacements for plastic products that proudly label themselves as BPA free have another form of BPA that just hasn't been banned yet, or hasn't had as much evidence to state that it should be banned yet. But we're sort of like, just kicking the can down the road when it comes to these chemicals. And I think there is a parallel there with some of these forever chemicals. So certain air fryers will have non-stick elements that can be deemed as forever chemicals. So when it comes to the time where you have to remove your air fryer, and that's another thing we haven't really talked about because they're quite a new gadget. How often do you actually need to replace them? Are these gadgets that can last a lifetime, like a good cast iron pan? Or is it something you're going to have to replace every 2 or 3 years? In which case, if it does have forever chemicals, that's not a great thing for the environment. On the positive side, there are some air fryers that are made out of glass. They are a lot more expensive, but they seem to be something that could be an argument against the fact that there's an environmental cost to purchasing an air fryer every couple of years or so. I don't know about the effectiveness of these glass air fryers though, and I doubt that they would have been used in those studies when it came to the comparison of the chemicals.
Yeah, they seem less
produced.
Common, which I wonder why. They're less common, so it might be because they don't produce the same results or because they're more expensive.
Yeah.
So I think that's a tricky one.
There's also ceramic air fryers, but again, there are some really interesting marketing techniques that a lot of these manufacturers use, whereby it can be ceramic, but it's coated. And the coating can sometimes have some of those harmful chemicals that we want to remove out of our cookware. So, as a rule of thumb, particularly, even in the studio here, we don't use non-stick. We only use stainless steel, which works really well as long as you take care of your pans. We use ceramic, but proper ceramic, which is cast on with a ceramic coating and no other non-stick coating on it. And then we also use cast iron, obviously. Those are the three things that I think are safe, and glass.
And glass.
Pyrex glass.
And natural materials.
Natural materials.
And I guess that's kind of it would be an interesting topic as well, to look at how to read those labels and how to get through those marketing claims, because it can be very difficult. When you see BPA free, you think it's a good thing. So you're like, oh, perfect, it's BPA free, I'm going to buy that.
Yes.
But as you said, which I didn't know, there is always a compromise that is made by the manufacturer. So when they're removing one compound and one chemical, they're replacing it by another potentially, which is, for just business purposes. So how do we get through those claims and choose products that don't have those forever chemicals? It's a bit of a difficult one.
It comes down to education. There's a similar parallel to be had with health claims on packaged foods, right? Because it's very easy to say contains a source of fiber, or rich in vitamin D and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, that doesn't negate the fact that it's a highly processed product. And I think there's a comparison there with certain other elements in your kitchen where they've been marketed to you as natural and safe and, BPA free, versus actually what's it made out of? Just tell me what it's made out of and I can make that decision myself. I don't need to be told that this isn't, it doesn't have a forever chemical that I'm aware of just because I've been told about that forever chemical and how it's bad for the environment. I should know cast iron, glass, stainless steel are my go-tos. Everything else, bit murky. That's sort of probably the rule of thumb that most people need.
I think that is a good rule of thumb, especially for appliances that you're using every day. I think that's kind of the idea, that what you're using the most regularly is what you should be a bit more aware of.
Totally, and I just a point on opinions about air fryers, because a lot of people ask me for my opinion on air fryers, and I think that is a function of what they've heard about air fryers from other sort of experts, and they can be very reputable experts as well. But ultimately, it's someone's opinion, and I don't think necessarily everyone has taken the time to dive into the research like you did for this particular podcast episode, and actually looked at the studies, the quality of the studies, the number of studies that are available out there, and just how much of a lack of information there is about these air fryers. So rather than us telling people you should or should not buy an air fryer, hopefully people are getting an idea of, okay, we've laid it out, there's pros and cons, and you can make the decision yourself based on your own ideas, your own convenience, your own sort of household needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I looked at some of the reputable sources of information online, and generally it's quite negative. They say that air frying should still be considered as fried foods, and it shouldn't be a daily occurrence. if you're not eating deep fried food every day, you shouldn't be eating air fried food every day. Basically, that's kind of the general idea. But I did like what Zoe did a bit of a dive into it, and I liked what they say, because they said that no single way to cook is automatically better at all times, and instead it's about diversifying the different cooking methods and making sure that you're not using the same thing all the time if you can. And that the health impact of air frying is a nuanced topic. And I think that's kind of a conclusion which maybe is a bit annoying, but it is true. It is true. There's pros,
annoying,
there are
but
cons.
true.
And it's a complex. We can't just say it's great or it's good or it's bad. It is a bit of a nuanced topic. But we will talk about our take on it and what's our conclusion on the research.
Absolutely.
And then maybe some practical tips for cooking quickly.
I think so. So from what I've heard from today, I think it really depends on what you're comparing it to. So whether you are a frequent deep fryer, a frequent oven baker, whether you love your sauteing or your pans, or whether you need a convenient option. And I think for me, as someone who cooks generally in a saute pan or steaming or baking, I'm probably going to lean more towards those cooking methods that I'm comfortable with, and use the air fryer just for my salmon gochujang bites that I love on Tuesdays, and that is like my treat. But other than that, I'll only use the air fryer probably when I'm in a bit of a rush and I need a quick, healthy lunch. And particularly paying attention to some of the things that you mentioned about herbs and acids and other sort of ways in which to mitigate any potential harmful compounds.
I think it's a good point. If the alternative between using an air fryer is not eating a cooked meal, or if you're in a rush and you don't have time to do anything else, and if you're not using the air fryer, you'll be buying a ready meal, for example, I think it's way better to use the air fryer.
I agree.
And I don't think it should be banned completely from your tools, but it could be a tool for occasional circumstances where you need a quick meal, or when you're tired and you're hungry and you just want something quick. But maybe not a daily staple. And then the foods you're cooking them with, I think definitely make a big impact. And what foods you're cooking, if it's like healthy foods and vegetables in an air fryer, probably will be different than processed meat in an air fryer, for example.
I would agree. I would say that it really does depend on the ingredients themselves. And from the way you've articulated some of the studies, which I think is fair and nuanced, we definitely need more research, right?
Yes. Basically, we need more studies. We need human studies. We need more studies comparing different types of cookings to really have a clear idea of the impact of air fryers on health. And maybe it will come. So maybe we'll do another episode next year, or like in a few years.
We could do like an update to this for sure. But for now, you got some really good cooking tips here, right?
Yeah. So I think if you're using the air fryer, make sure to clean it properly. To avoid using old oil, which I think is that's a really good point,
because I think a lot of people, probably myself included, don't clean the air fryer as often as they should do. And when you're adding some of those fats that are constantly getting burnt and then reburnt and then reburnt, it's almost the same as reusing the same deep fat frying oil in the same vat that a lot of people do to save costs and all the rest of it. But it's really not great, because you're concentrating those harmful chemicals over and over again. It's probably not as harmful as deep fat frying and reusing that oil, but it's still going to be harmful. And anything we can do to mitigate against inflammation would be a good thing.
Yeah, how do you clean
my air fryer? So I've seen these things on TikTok actually, whereby you can dunk the air fryer in water and very liquid. I should probably mitigate this, because I don't think you're meant to use this way.
Really?
And you close it and you put it on a low heat setting.
Really?
Yeah, and it basically cleans the air fryer just for like a minute or so, and then take it out and then you clean it. So, and that way it's like you've taken it to a low temperature, it's got rid of all the grime and the grease, and then you can dry it and then put it back in.
And you've tried it?
I've tried that, and it works okay actually. But I mean, the easiest way, and to make sure that you're doing it safely, because I don't want people to like overload their electricity or whatever. Like, be safe with this, kids. You want to take it out and then just clean it, and then I use baking parchment as well, just to make it easier to clean. That's
so
one
you
of
don't
my
have
tips.
to remove all the
I don't use
food
foil
residues
anymore because of the other podcast that we did on foil.
Well, like I'm ruining all your favorites. It's not on purpose. I wish it was different results. And then the second tip is, if you are buying a new air fryer, as we said, avoiding non-stick coatings, choosing natural materials like glass, ceramic, or stainless steel, which can be more expensive. So it's if you can,
Yes.
and if you're buying a new one.
Yeah. I would definitely look into buying a glass one actually, and probably trying them out. We'll probably try them out in the studio and see what's up.
It would be good to know if they work as well.
Yeah,
I wonder.
Do a little comparison actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, with some of the ones that we were gifted.
And then, as we said, using protective food combinations, focusing on your overall diet before. I think the priority is really about increasing the quality of our diet, increasing the ingredients we're consuming rather than choosing the perfect cooking method. I think the priority is really to eat more fruits and vegetables, like we always talk about.
Totally.
And cooking method might not have that big of an impact.
Yeah, and I guess like one of the points that I glean from you is mixing up your cooking methods. So, instead of, like I was saying at the start, instead of just doing air frying like every other
meal.
Day or every meal, I'm gonna start doing more sauteing and the other cooking methods that we know are tried and tested, and they're unlikely or less likely to have harmful side effects.
So in terms of the point of using an air fryer, which is, I think I don't use one yet because I don't have one at home.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people is to save time, less cleaning, everything in one cooking pot or one chamber. So if we are to use it less, for example, or not to use it as a daily staple, do you have any tips to make cooking quicker?
Yeah.
And to kind of reduce that cooking time using a pan or an oven?
Yeah, so I do a lot of like one pan cooks, and actually, I wrote a whole book 3-2-1 on this subject because I knew one of the pain points for a lot of people is just the washing up. So getting used to tray bakes, casseroles, stews, and curries are fantastic ways to ensure you're still getting minimal washing up, but then also you're concentrating a lot of those flavors in the vessel as well. So I think like having a few master recipes that I can quickly put this on a tray, a little bit of olive oil into the oven, and then I've cooked enough for today, my partner, whoever else, and then also tomorrow's lunch as well. So that way you're maximizing the use of your oven rather than just cooking like one meal at a time. And then also like I use a big saute pan as well with a lid. And for potatoes, so if I'm doing a potato base, I'll finely dice the potato, put it in a little bit of olive oil and put the lid on. And that creates a sauteing effect and a steaming effect. So it actually reduces the amount of time that it takes for me to cook potatoes. Or like diced potatoes, and then I'll add a bit of like grated garlic, some herbs and spices, some other beans, for example, maybe another sort of dressing, and then like maybe some proteins on top. Again, put the lid on, and then I've steamed it. I've just basically gone through a recipe here, but you get the point. Like making sure that you have some one pan recipes in your repertoire that you can quickly just put together at the end of the day when you don't really need to think about it.
I'm sure the same for squash as well, and sweet potatoes and the steaming.
I do the same thing for all my starchies. So whether it's parsnips or even a courgette will work, even though it takes a lot less cooking time than other starchy vegetables. But yeah.
Do you have a go-to one pan meal for lunch? That if you're not to use the air fryer, what would you do?
Oh, so I have a bunch actually. So one of them is an almond curry that I always go to from the 3-2-1 book. That for me is like, it has loads of spices in, but I cheat. So I'll just use like a garam masala, a cumin, and like coriander seed. And then I'll add some like ground almonds to the base and then some tomatoes. Instead of cooking the tomatoes down, I use like chopped tomatoes from a can and then add that to the base, let that cook down, and then I'll add other elements to it. So whatever veggies I've got, whether it's sugar snaps or peas or tender stem broccoli that I finally chop up, and then for protein I'll add either cooked lentils or like a fish or something like that.
And that would be really quick, and I guess you could use frozen veggies, maybe like already chopped.
I always use frozen
so you don't
peas.
have to chop anything.
Yeah, and I always use that.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
I haven't had lunch yet, so getting hungry.
Yeah.
And then I think the last tip that was quite interesting is like quick cooking ingredients. So maybe prioritizing those.
Yeah.
Do you have any preferred grains, for example, that cook quicker?
Yeah. So, I mean, I always use short grain brown rice. I think that only takes around 15 to 20 minutes, depending on the brand that you use. But my go-tos are those pouches, actually. Now, it's a convenience product that you can put in the sort of camp of mildly processed because it's already been cooked and it has a tiny bit of oil in it. But wow, is it a time saver because you're adding that quality carbohydrate in the appropriate amounts. You can freeze them as well after you've opened them, so you don't need to use the whole pack if you don't want to. And there's such a big variety of them. And the ones that I think are unflavored are the best. So you can get pui lentils, beluga lentils. You can almost get most of the legumes out of these packages. But then also things like quinoa, of which you can get tricolor quinoa. So red, white, and black quinoa. I love those. Yeah, plant points. You get all these different plant points. And then it's just a case of like adding herbs and spices to those. So those are my sort of go-to quick cook sort of elements that I always fall back on.
And then you would have, I guess, no-cook meals. Like our food photographer was just eating a salad. She made it in like 2 minutes. With mozzarella and tomatoes and I don't know what else she had.
Well, we have no-cook category on the app, actually, where it's just literally throwing stuff together. And like, actually, one of my go-to ingredients is sprouted lentils. In fact, I've got some in the kitchen today of like sprouted lentils that are just like broccoli sprouts, alfalfa, radish sprouts, and sprouted lentils they're great. I throw them into everything.
So there are ways to make quick meals without the air fryer, I think.
Absolutely.
And for me, even if, as we said, it's a nuanced topic, we're not saying ditch your air fryer, but I don't have one, for example. And I was like, should I get one now? Everyone was getting one. And I think it's a good conclusion to know that you don't need all the gadgets to make quick meals. There are other ways to make quick meals and quick lunches without needing to buy the latest air fryer.
So you're not going to buy an air fryer?
So I don't think I am.
Oh, wow.
I don't think I am.
Okay.
Maybe for once in a while.
Okay.
Maybe I'll use the one in the studio first.
Try it.
They kind of scare me.
Because they're so big.
It's like a big thing, yeah. I like seeing my food cook. Maybe I'll get a glass one.
You can get ones with glass.
Yeah.
And then you can see into it.
Yeah, maybe I'll
If we get a glass one for the studio, which I think we might do, just for the test. Try it and then then maybe we'll get another sponsor who will sponsor us and then you can take that one. Wink, wink. This is great. Thank you so much, Sakina. Thanks for allowing me to react to the research that you've done. And like, if people have any more questions about the air fryer as a topic,
it's an open topic.
Definitely an open topic. And I think there's going to be a lot more research coming out around forever chemicals in general. And we probably need to do another episode on forever chemicals actually as it pertains to cookware and materials, because we get asked about that a lot. If you loved that episode, you will love the full library of podcasts from the Doctor's Kitchen Library. We talk about everything from inflammation, supplements, and food as medicine. Just like this episode right here. You can click it right now and check it out.